Hello everybody, and welcome to our first episode of UI tutorials. In this tutorial, I'm gonna teach you how to create UI. That's it. Technically, I'm gonna teach you some mechanics, basics, sorry, about UI elements such as images, texts, everything. And the first thing we need to do, I need to take a reference. So I took this image from Fortnite, and we're gonna rebuild this UI exactly how it is. Apart from the graphical assets, I'm gonna put a placeholders, but you can replace them with the font that you want and the images that you want. So in this first episode, we're gonna create this left panel of buttons according using anchoring, pivoting, and also adding this sub elements to each button. Let's see how it works. So the first thing we have to do is create a new project, which I have created inside of it a folder. I'm gonna create more folders with more tutorials to come in. So the first folder, I named it episode 1, and it has the image. As you can see, the image of the tutorial that we're gonna work on. So this image is gonna be saved in here as a reference, and then I made a scene called episode 1, which is empty scene. So before we start this episode, I'm gonna explain some of the stuff, and this whole series is gonna be purely UI based. It's gonna have almost nothing, no scripting at all. I mean, maybe later on we're gonna use some animation scripts for the UI to, like sliding, all these things, mainly using do tween, but overall it's gonna be all inside the inspector. So we have the scene. I called it episode 1. Let's start by creating a camera. So we have a camera. Let's make it main camera and keep it called camera 000 and make sure it's orthographic. I I don't like the skybox, so I just make it solid color and black. And remove the HDS. So these things I just to reduce as much visual impact on the GPU, but not necessary for here. The second thing we need to do is we need to create a UI canvas. So canvas um, is basically like the container of all the UI elements. It's the rootest of the rootest. So this is the basic thing that you need to have in your scene to be able to render any UI elements. Whenever you create a canvas, it comes along with, of course, the rig transform, the canvas, scaler, and graphic raycaster, and along with an event system object. This one comes along with it. So this one handles the input of the player, also depending on the system. So don't have to worry about this, just keep it. And the UI canvas, it has, as I said, the canvas, the scaler, and the graphic raycaster. So the graphic raycaster is the one that handles clicking either the mouse or touch on the screen itself. So if you disable it, you won't be able to click or anywhere. So also keep it as it is. You can play with this stuff if you want, but for the sake of tutorial, keep it as it is because this is a bit more advanced. We don't need to block anything. And the canvas itself, it has 3 mods. The overlay, which is technically this whole thing, it's overlays on the screen itself. And it's not related to the camera. And an easy way to explain this is like whatever your camera is, whatever interactions of the camera is in a 3D environment, it's going to be unrelated to the UI. But then you have world space, which is basically the same as screen space, but it's for games where you want to use the UI interactions as a 3D. For one of the examples, let's say there's a game called Doom, which the player, for example, comes close to a screen, a 3D screen, and they can click. So that 3D screen is basically a world space map. You can add UI buttons, all this stuff, but in a world space as a 3D model. The third thing is screen space camera. So screen space camera is the similar as the uh, screen space overlay, but it's gonna be attached to the camera. And this is probably my favorite because I have the UI attached to the camera itself. And one of the drawbacks of this is, let me show you. So what I mean by this is, here's the camera, and here's the UI. So another thing is, if you have a 3D model, like let's say a cube somewhere, and then you have a UI in front, so the cube will be visible before the UI. So that's one of the drawbacks. If you have a 3D environment with a lot of stuff, it's better to use a screen space. Or uh, like this is good for main scenes and all this stuff, but for the in-game, use the screen space overlay. But I'm going to use this one here because our example is inside the main menu, and then we can avoid all this stuff. I think I deleted the camera. Okay, let's delete the cube, canvas, and the features in here, we have the plane distance, which means how far the canvas is from the camera. So if you see here, this is our orthographic camera, and this canvas is right here. So let's make it slightly closer. It's fine. We don't need to be that far away. And the canvas scaler is also has more advanced stuff to it, but let's explain. I'm going to tell you which one to use because it's the default one. So whenever you create a UI, make sure to use the scale with screen space, and it gives you a reference resolution. Um, in all desktop versions, we go with 16.9, 16 by 9 aspect ratio. It's this one, 16 by 9. For phones, it's the opposite one. I mean, it's not exactly 9 by 16, but it's portrait. But for this one, you can keep it as it is. It's not a big deal, but because I like to use the exact same ratio, so 16 by 9 is 1.7, right? So and 800 by 600 is not really 16 by 9 because it's 1.333. So to make it similar, you can put the reference of your screen exactly as it is. You can put it full HD. Again, these values are for you to play with. It's fine. And then you have the match of the screen width and height. This is all dependent on the platform you want to play with. Also, let's say, for example, if you have a camera with a different width or a different height, but similarly, like the height changes more than the width and width changes more than the height. And it's it's really important when you go in advanced levels, and I explain this later on, but for you, make sure it put it at 0.5 so it actually reacts, the UI reacts exactly for the width and the height in the same level. So yeah, we reached this place, so make sure that to put these things as this right here. Again, you can play with overlay, it's not a big deal, but for me when I put camera, I can see it here more easily in the viewport. So we have passed the creation of a canvas. Again, if you're getting bored from this stuff, skip forward. I'm doing this as a beginners. Next thing we need to do is we need to create an image. An image is basically I'm gonna put the reference in here so we can have a reference image that helps us create the UI. The image is one of the UI elements in Unity, which you can use to render sprites. The other one is called UI, raw image, which renders texture, not sprites. And the difference between these ones are, just almost the same. It's just these ones has different. Let me show you. So this one has sprite. If we put this as default, this is a texture. This one has different parameters you can implement with, and mainly in all the games, in all the UI elements inside the game, we use sprite because it has more, um, you know, applicable features. So skipping this part, let's go revert. We have this image as we downloaded it. It's the tutorial reference. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag and drop it into the source image. You see here, it's not stretched fully and properly. So the first thing I want to do is I want to click this 2D button, which is gonna change the viewport to 2D. So in our game view, we can see it's small. So one thing we can do is we can click here, set native size, which is gonna set the image to its native size, which is this big. And it's of course outside the whole screen, because this is our screen. So this is gonna be our first um, thing to work on is the anchor preset. The anchor preset is related only to the UI rig transform. And it's a huge part of handling responsive sprites. So right now it's set for center middle. What this means is the anchor of it, if you can see here, see these four, it has like a cubical part of thing. So they're all of them, they're put in the middle of the screen, which means is it's going to stay in the middle regardless of the width and height, if they change or not. Like you can see here, whatever I change anything, it's going to remain in the middle. What I mean by middle is like it doesn't go left and right. So what we need to do is we need to make it fully stretched on the screen by modifying this part. So I'm going to do something in my using my skillful paint skills. So let's say this is the image, right? By default, the anchor preset comes in the middle, which means the image is anchored in here. Anchor means this is the place where the image is gonna, what's the best word is, react its position and scale according to that point. If the anchor is here and I scale the image is gonna scale, let me show you, like this. But if it's on top left, it's gonna scale like this. Top right, etc. If it's in the middle, it's gonna scale like this, which means it's gonna scale from inside that point. And you can see here the pivot is right here. So if I go here, let me just show you the example before I say something. So if I go here, it's gonna scale this way here, like this. If we change the camera screen, so reset everything as it is, right? So we reset everything as 100 by 100. So the first thing we need to do is we need to stretch it, right? So the stretch we can either use the preset one or change the anchors. Anchors are these points. Let me hide the gizmos slightly because they're a bit large. Let's increase this by 400 and 200. So here we go. You see these points? These are anchors. Top left, top right, bottom right, bottom left. What we need to do is we need to increase these ones so they will be fit the whole UI camera here. So manually we can do it this way, which can give us by default the stretch. So if you put this, it goes to the top left, bottom left, etc. And then there's more fields like a middle left and middle right. And you have the bottom. Bottom means this one. Oops, can't click. So the bottom means it's stretch all the way bottom and up. So we're gonna encounter all these stuff. Don't get confused right now. Let's implement what we need for the image that we have. So this image should be stretched, right? So we're gonna click here and stretch it. So right now the anchor is stretched. You see, this is X and this is Y. So minimum X is 0 and this is the X and this is the Y. Sorry, this is X and this is the Y. Minimum X is 0, maximum X is 1. So 0, 1. That's correct. You see it's properly. And then for Y, minimum Y is 0 and maximum Y is 1, which is here. So right now we have the image anchorly stretched to all the screen, but the position is not yet fixed. You see here left, top, bottom, right. So what we need to do, we need to zero out these ones. What I mean by zero out, because right now the position between the edge of the screen, the image, and the anchor is 264. So if we increase it, decrease it, we see like we come closer to it. So if we zero this out, we're touching the edge of the anchor. And if we do the same thing for the right, it goes to the right. So we actually now, we're stretching it according to the anchor. And we do the same thing here and here. If I Control Z everything and go back to how it was before, like this, right? So reset. Click here and reset. There's another way where you can do all these things faster, and Unity has a shortcut. Let's say you want to make it anchor on the top left. You can click this and then you can zero this stuff out and it's anchored, right? But there's a better way. So let's say I want to stretch it. So before I click here, if you hold Alt, you see this change. So it tells you change the anchor and apply the position directly. So if I keep clicking Alt and I click on it, it changes the anchors to to what we want, 0, 1, 0, 1, and then position itself. And you can see here, it set the whole thing according to what we want, which is amazing. I choose this image because it has the same aspect ratio as my screen. If I pick an image that's portrait, for example, let's say here, if I change to portrait, you see it's gonna be stretched. But even though if it's stretched, you have this button called preserve aspect ratio, which means whatever the image is, and this one is a bit tricky to implement. You have to make sure they have the proper aspect ratio, and then not this one. It's gonna leave the rest of the space empty. So it's not gonna stretch the image itself. It's gonna stretch it as much as it can with maintaining the aspect ratio. So right now it's full screen on a portrait screen, but if I click this one, it goes back here. So you can see it's not deformed. Going back to the art screen, we're here. That's fine. So we've set up this thing, which is basically the first step. And I'm gonna name this preview image. Save it. So you can do two things here to start working. For me, because I can only stream on one screen, I'm gonna use this within Unity. But what you can do is you can put this image on another screen or put it somewhere else or print it out so you can see it all the time and then apply the UI element. But what I'm gonna do inside Unity, so Unity 2020 gives you this thing where you can click this eye icon and then you can hide the view of that element inside the edit mode here. Never mind the game view will remain the same. This is not going to affect the image itself. It's just going to change the render inside the edit mode, which is going to be enough for me to test and then work, because I have the views side by side here, left and right. So the left one, I'm gonna hide it here, and then we have the right one for a reference. In this episode, I'm gonna implement these side buttons. So let's explore the whole UI. So you can see we have a background image. This is just a basic image. Technically, it's not an image, it's a 3D model with a 3D environment, but I'm just going to use an image right now. We're concerned about the UI, not the 3D environment. And we have a left panel for buttons. And these these are basically buttons with text in them. And some of them has auxiliary, text on the side, which is fine. And on the top middle, we have, I want to say, toggle buttons, which you can choose and then probably switch from this area to another area. Also buttons with background and text. On top right, we have, let's skip this X and then things. We have a button which leads to the, options menu probably, and we have the coins. It's basically a container of image with inside of it is two images, both on left and right, and in the middle is text. Here, it's the same thing. We have a container image with text inside and a small image next to it. From the top left, we've got the power. I think this is level of power. I'm not really sure with what is this in Fortnite, but we have an image with a text and some sort of a horizontal filling bar. And next to it, we have 4 similar buttons with a custom filling image. Like this one is the default, and then you can fill it with different images. And last, we have an image with image container with a inside image and a text. So these are all the elements of the whole UI. And then we're going to start implementing them one by one until we reach the whole thing. But I'm not going to use this font or this image or this kind of a UI because I don't have access to these graphics. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use placeholders and default fonts, and then you can change anything inside your project, whatever you have graphics. So in this episode, I'm going to start with, let's see, I'm going to start with these upper buttons, right? Actually, you know what? I'm going to start with the left ones. It's much easier. So let's minimize the image and start. So let's keep this in here. Let's forget about this, right? First thing we need to do is whenever you create something, make sure it's not thrown in, here. Like it's not, you have a lot of objects thrown out here. So make sure they're parented properly, so they have grouped up properly. And the first thing to do in these stuff is to create an empty parent, or like empty game object first. So let's call it left panel, okay? There are two ways of handling this. You can directly apply the left panel, which means put the stuff inside directly, or you can make an empty object similar to the canvas, but I'm gonna go with the easy one. Let's directly apply the left panel. So the left panel is this here. So you want to make sure it's here, and it's not in the middle left, it's in middle left, slightly top, but not at the edge. You can do this manually, right? You can play these stuff, do these things, but this is not the correct way of doing it, not the correct way, because you change stuff. See, like if I'm in 16 by 9, you see, this is our layout. So if I change to 16 by 10, it goes outside. So you have to do it this way. But if you do it inside and go back here, it goes outside. So probably you can see the issue is the anchor. So right now the anchor is our main focus in all the tutorials. So I'm gonna explain it over and over again in each element until you get it, because it's a big issue for a lot of programmers in Unity. So the first thing we need to do is we need to focus on four things, 4 points of the anchor, the minimum maximum of x and y. So we have two values for x and two values for y. So in here, we're going to start with, let's deal with the horizontal x. So we can see the x value is not exactly 0, it's 0 point something, but we're going to go with 0, it's fine. We're going to anchor it to the left, which is going to be here. So we choose the left panel, make 0 of x minimum, and the maximum is here 1, but we don't have to go to the most right side. So imagine this from 0 to 1, and this is 0.5 in the middle, and this is 0.25. So let's go with maybe 0.2, which is going to be probably here. And then you can see the effect on the left side. Like if you increase the x maximum value, you can 0.2. See, if I make it 0.3, it decreases here, because as I said, this is from 0 to 1. So let's make it 0.3. 0.3 seems good enough. So we finished from the x value, right? Now for the y. So the y is start from 0 at bottom to the top 1. So you can see this is in this area of the screen. So it's not in 0. It's basically over the top, over the half. So it's 0.5 most likely. And then up in here is point, let's say 9 or 85. So let's try. So 0.5 is fine. So it's here. Maybe we have to go slightly lower because you see it's way too high. So let's go 0.4. That's good. And if you go 0.9, you can see this part, it's going here. So this looks fairly enough. So let's make it 0.85. So you can see, forget about this rectangle, see these anchors, right? So if you compare this view like here, if you get, see it's almost the same position. So what you can do is you can play with the values more, like decrease the maximum x, like here decrease the maximum x, and play with the y. You can play them manually if you want, like this. But again, I'd rather have these as a fixed values. Like for example, right now it's 0.024, which is doesn't look too good, right? So let's make it 0.2, and the maximum 0.25, because we need to add this stuff. And for the y, 0.4 with 0.85. That's good, right? So we've fixed all the x and y anchors. So what we need to do right now, we need to zero out the positions, and this you have to do it every time you change the anchors. What this means is, let me show you. Let me show. So this is our panel, right? And let me make it slightly transparent. So this is our panel. This is where the panel right now. It's on this white screen, but it has to be here, anchor display. So we have to zero out all the corners. Don't worry about the small values. It looks like this all the time. So right now it's anchored and then set position. Let's remove this. You can do this if you want to check the how your panel is looking. So you add an image and then you Alt click stretch, and you have all this stuff. Of course, it's better to have it semi-transparent by changing the alpha. So that's it. So you have this part. You can see you can move it like here. Here we go. We've set the panel. So next thing we need to do is we need to add the elements. And I want to show you something here. For example, let's say if I change the aspect ratio to 0.610, you see it still sticks in the same place. It does not change. Even if you manually play with the position, it still have the proper anchoring. Like look, here we go up. See, everything looks really fine. Let's go back to 16.9 by 9, sorry, and then decrease this, put this here. So here we go. So the first thing we need to do is we need to put the buttons. Let's create first thing is text. So we need to use text. Again, you can use whichever text you want. I'm going to go with Text Mesh Pro. So I have to download it first. This is a new project. You can use Unity text. It's not a big deal. It's my own personal preference. So here we go. So we got the text, right? Let's name it button 1. So first thing we have to put this here. And then, you know, if any beginner will start, he will go like this. He will put this, you know, and this, which is not a proper, you know, not a really proper way to apply this whole stuff, because you might go outside of it and it will change with the, you can see here, it changes really not proper. So it has to be fit inside the container that we created. So let's start one by one. So we have button 1, and I'm gonna hide this element here because I don't want to see the back of this stuff. First of all, we need to make sure that this whole button is fit inside this container. It doesn't go outside. See, like here. We have to do the same thing. First of all, we were working on this panel, right? And it was a child of this canvas, and this canvas has this whole edge of the screen. So we're gonna work on the basis of parent-children. So this child is the parent of the canvas. So whatever this scale is, whatever this canvas anchoring, it's related to the parent. The same thing happens here. So we have the button child of left panel. It's gonna, whatever anchor I put in here is gonna be related to the left panel, not the canvas. What I mean is, if I put this as stretch, it's gonna stretch inside here only. Not if I put it outside, I stretch it, it's gonna stretch to the whole canvas. So let's get back inside. Let's not make it stretch. Keep it as it was. We need to make sure that we have it fit inside this whole thing. So first of all, we have to make sure that the minimum x, which is here, going to be on the left, and then 0 and 1. So we have to go 0 and 1 for the x, which is fine. You can see it here, this whole thing. And for y, we have two approaches here. We can either fix the y position for each button, which is going to be really mundane, or we can use something that Unity has called vertical layout group. So we have to go to the parent of the object and add the vertical grouping. And what this does is it groups all the elements inside this object vertically. Right now it looks distorted, and I'll show you why. Because we have all these features in here. Um, what you need to do is ignore the padding and the spacing and the alignment, all this stuff. I'm going to explain what you need right now. So the child alignment means where is going to which angle the whole objects are going to be anchored. Right now it's upper left here. So if I make it upper right, it's going to come in here, upper right. If I go bottom right, it's going to bottom here. So for this one, as you can see, the images are aligned to the left top. So we're going to go with upper left. And we're going to disable enable some elements here so we can use our own features here. So before we do this, let's go back here. Let's reset this thing here to how it was. Right? So we have this thing as 200 by 50. So we need to use a specific height. The height should be fixed for all the buttons. So let's say this button doesn't look exactly as this one, it's slightly large. Let's make it 40, no, 20. Probably it's good size. Yeah, I think 20 is enough. Let's go 25. And the size of this font is way too huge. Let's go with 20, no, 24, and it's bold. Okay, so let's type, I don't know what this, schematics. So we have schematics. I'm gonna remove the bold because this font doesn't support bold properly, but you can put bold for your own self. So we have this thing, right? So we have fixed the size of the image as in height, the font size. Also, we have to make sure it's anchored to the left, and it's by default anchored to the left. And let's put the Y alignment in the middle. So here we go. We finished our first button, right? Now we go back here. Let's enable this, and then we have to use these two elements as it was. And you can check here that the image still has a width, but we need it to be stretched. So to make it stretched, we need to control the width of the child. So what it does, it stretches the width of the child to all the width of the parent. Like if the parent has, see, if it increases this part, it increases with it. It changes it. So that's good. We control the child size, but we don't want to control the height. If we control the height, it's going to go crazy. See, it's going to stretch the whole button inside the child, which we don't need. Here we go. Because we need the buttons to spawn one by one. So as soon as we do this, we can just click on this button and Control D or duplicate, and it will create more buttons. So they will start to, spawn properly, but not as much as we want, like here. So because we have this tick here called child force expand. So what this means is if we have 4 elements, they're gonna they're gonna spawn all over the height, right? So it's gonna fill the whole thing. But if we disable this, they're gonna spawn without filling the whole thing. What I mean by this, like you see, it's not filled. It's not trying to fill the whole canvas, which what we need right now. So this one, you can play with it, see how it works. But for this whole UI, we need it to be disabled. So we need them to be sorted out really next to each other. And the next thing is, you can see that the sizes, like the distance between the buttons, are slightly more than we have right now. So we can play with the spacing. Spacing means how many, points do we have to put between each button. So let's make it 10. I think 10 is the best one. Yeah, actually, right. 10 is the best one. So we have them lined up properly. So button 1, button 2, it's gonna have the name of, I can't see behind. So backpack, backpack, and this one is storage. This one is collection book. The font is way too big. Let's decrease it slightly. Let's make it 20. Button 3, button 4, button 5, and button 6. So for this one, it says transform. And last but not least, resources. So here we go. So what we did here, let me hide the image in the preview. We've got the buttons aligned, and I mean, they're not 100% exactly as the image, but again, you can play with these values as much as you want. You can make it 0.25, you can even 0.03, like this will be exactly so. It's all about aligning the same image itself. So let's hide this here. So we've got these buttons set up. The next thing we need to do is we need to drag and drop all of them, and we have to add the button component. Again, this is going to be related to programming, which we're not going to do here. I just added this one so you can make them interactable. So these buttons now have the onClick listener, which you can link to any script you want. And the last thing is we need to modify, we need to add these small elements on the right side. So these small parts are gonna be more of a hack, not a hack, but addition that doesn't relate to the image itself. What we're gonna do is we're gonna add another child inside the button and anchor it to the right of it and then add stuff. In order to do this, we can just right click here and click Text Mesh Pro. The first thing you need to do is I'm going to click here extra, extra, and then click here, go to the middle right, right? So it's anchored to the middle right. So that's good. This is the first step. First step is it's anchored here, but we need it to be anchored here, but displayed like this, right? So what this means we need to move the anchor, sorry, the pivot to the other side. So anchoring is proper for us. Pivoting means, um, let's say, let me show you. So let's say we have a door, right? We have this door, this thing, and this is the handle. Amazing. So this is the door. The door has an anchor and has a pivot. So pivot is basically the place where the whole object stands on. And the door pivot is right here and here. It's technically here, this whole area. So what that means is if I rotate the door, it's going to rotate along this pivot. That's the whole point. In 3D, it makes more sense, but in 2D, it's slightly more ambiguous, but it does the same stuff. Like right now, if I increase the width and height, you see it's scaling according to the pivot, and the pivot is 0.5 and 0.5, which is in the middle. Let me put it here. But if I make it this pivot 0 by 0, see now it's right here. If I scale it, it's going to scale according to the pivot, which is exactly what we need. In order to put this text in here, we have to make the pivot on the left, only for the X. For the Y, doesn't matter, let's keep it in the middle. For the X, we have to make it 0. So when this is zeroed out, and we zero out the X and Y, you see now it goes here. Why? Because if we break into 0.5, it positions the image according to its pivot, and the pivot is in the middle. But if we change the pivot to the edge, and then we zero the position, it puts the pivot properly. So that's amazing. We need to make sure that the X pivot is properly set, like here, and we have to make sure that the height and the anchor is properly set from here till here, because right now it's not set anywhere. So let's make it 0 to 1, which is going to be here to here, and then zero out all the stuff. Play with the font size. Let's make it smaller. This one is 20. So let's make this, I don't know, 14. And put it inside here. So we have it aligned inside the middle. What about the width? The width, it's also dependent on you. Like right now, it says what it says, like something out of something. Let's say it's 13, 14, 55 out of 300. That's fine. Technically, we finished from this button, but as you can see that the text is anchored to the button directly after it finishes, which is what we don't have right here. What we have is the button finishes here on the top right because our panel is forcing the child to expand. So if we disable this, the button will expand according to its size of text. You see like what I mean? If I remove some words, it's gonna decrease the width. So it's changing to its preferred size, which is what we need right here. So we have this element attached to the button itself and anchored to the right side, but it's way too attached to it. So we need to slightly move it to the right. So we can just put this as 10 probably, or 5. That's good. And I want to see if it's anchored properly. Oh, it's anchored to the top. So what we need to do is, if we have this button here, the extra, we can just click on this button, so the Y alignment will be top. So we have this set up for the top button. Again, play with the width. I have it 50, 75, it's fine. So if I click Control D here and drag and drop it to the bottom one, because we have how many buttons? I have 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 of them. So we have 1 and 2 and 3. So I drag and drop it, but then we have to change the position because it's still in the top part. So let's make this 0, 0, and 0. We don't play with the width because it's going to change. If you make this here, it's going to remove it. Same thing goes to this one. 0, 0, 0. Some of the stuff are going to be a bit complex for you, but practicing these stuff more than one time, you're going to get ahead of what does the anchor mean and what does the pivot means. But again, feel free to ask. That's why I'm here. So I assume that we have finalized our first panel. As you can see, let me make it here. I'm gonna unhide everything. Let's hide our work, which is gonna be left panel. This is how the reference is. If we hide the reference and put the image, you see we've created our first element, which is the left panel of the buttons. And seems annoying, but really interesting, as the more you get involved in UI, the easier for you to handle more platforms and more aspect ratios. So apart from applying this and you giving me as much questions as you need, because this sounds really confusing for some beginners, which is fine. And I hope you liked this episode, and there are more to come where we're going to implement the upper panels and all these stuff step by step with explaining all the features. So I hope you liked it. If you did have any questions, and I'm sure you did, hit the comment below or join our Discord channel, where I will be able to help you and other developers as well. And I'll see you everybody in the next one. Bye bye.